Fireside Chat with Consensys Labs. Today we have Dr. Hunter Albright back and chatting with us about distributed business models. Hunter, thanks so much for joining us again. Just to kick things off, this chat is about exploring distributed business models. We've already explored some distributed thinking together over our various Fireside Chats, but distributed business models are by nature disruptive. Can you kind of give us some overview of what you mean by distributed business models?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, I'm fascinated by this, Zach. I think it's an area where we have many more questions than we have answers, and the more people are willing to experiment and try things around distributed and decentralized business models, the better off we're going to be. I think first and foremost, we tend, in terms of disruptive technologies, start to apply things to models we already know. And fundamentally, I think the blockchain and the distributed ledger technologies are really encouraging us to try models that we haven't even thought of yet. And if we think about what the models that we ended up seeing realized for Web 2.0, they ended up being very different than what we had in sort of the first round of the web. And it actually took us 6 to 8 years to get there. You know, Google and other companies went through a long road that many of us tend to forget to ultimately get to the model that worked for them. And I think we're in for that type of experience with Web 3.0 and sort of how we get there. And so to answer your question more succinctly and the key points, the key thing for me is the different players that are involved in it and how everybody starts to collect and get rewarded for value. In sort of Web 1 and Web 2, the model was still very much of a centralized experience where we're taught, and for the most part, for many of us, our careers have been, how do you create a monopoly, right? How do you create a centralized business model where your unfair advantage or your sort of position allows you to capture greater value in that process? And Web 3 and the decentralized business models will completely change that, because in many respects, nobody will own the ecosystem. We will all get paid for our participation in that ecosystem in various shapes and forms.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. I'm kind of curious, like when you're talking through like the Web 2, the original like unfair advantage, is that something that we should be doing away with thinking wise? Or is it more of us thinking about the unfair advantage of cooperation versus competition? Is it a dichotomy, or is it kind of an outmoded way of thinking, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I think it fundamentally changes. I mean, the thing that was missing in Web 2 was really this idea of identity and the ability to own our own data. And I think for me, that's one of the things that radically changes. And if you look at a lot of the 2.0 business models, they were doing good, and they still are doing good in terms of building applications that are very valuable to all of us. But as a byproduct, they were collecting a ton of data that, yes, we gave implicit consent in terms of using that data. We know that they're collecting it. We're willing to sort of allow Facebook to use it, at least we have been, because of the benefits we get out of the product. So I look at Web 2.0 as they built great applications. They were then further monetizing that opportunity through the data that they were collecting, and that's now changing. I think in Web 3.0, we've got more players that are in the overall business models, but everybody will be getting value out of individual transactions based on the value we're bringing to the table, whether that's mining, whether that's validation, whether that's contributing data, whether that's building individual protocols or tools that get used within the ecosystem. We're going to have to figure out how to play nice together and do things in a way that we're just not quite used to. I think there are models on Web 2.0 where companies collaborate and they integrate, and really that's where we have tended to see a lot of innovation. But I think we'll see that being more of the de facto standard with Web 3.0, almost by design, compared to Web 2.0.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds like it might be hard to imagine new business models then, given the fact that we're kind of anchored in what we've seen, even though it's funny because when you talk about kind of pre-Web 2, we were anchored there too. And then Web 2 opened up a whole new set of options, right? And I think that is kind of happening here now. We're still kind of anchored in this idea that the Web 2 byproduct monetization stuff is where the value is, right? How do you kind of get yourself outside the realm of what we have and imagine business models that are available to us now that we have Web3?
In the model, with sort of the new sort of Web3 business model, there are more players that have to participate and have to figure out how to get value out of it. So I think about those that you've got people that are basically contributing to the running of sort of the ecosystem. So you've got the miners, you've got people doing validation for the network. It might be the block, building the blocks or sort of validating transactions. You've got those that are providing the tools, the protocols, the applications at sort of the back end or the middle layer or even the front end that help connect or a full solution. You've got the users that are then contributing their own data, and then you actually have the people that are developing the application, and you can think of them almost as the orchestrators that are bringing all of these people together. They're probably doing the marketing, they're probably doing some of the branding, but they might be the key person that's helping be the advocate for the collective value of the group. And so you're going to have to make, not only do you have to make the end user happy, but now you have those 3 or 4 other groups that add some complexity. We've got to figure out how to keep everybody incentivized. And in a permissionless system, we then have to think about the consensus mechanisms that will keep the whole thing balanced in terms of the governance and all of the group decision making and dynamics. So there's an element of the governance that is a brand new thing that traditionally was dictated by the centralized unit, but now we have to get it to be agreed by the group.
I love that. And so I guess I want to push this a little bit further, right? We've been talking a lot about the difference between building for Web 2 and the difference between modeling stuff out for Web 2 and Web 3. What you're describing sounds much more difficult to validate. Right? Like when we were validating Web 2 products, we were only validating human behavior experience, right? Like they're looking at this as like a value add. So the experience was positive and we could kind of build products around this. What you're kind of talking about is modeling and validating human interaction. So like multi-actor products essentially, or multi-actor protocols. Could you talk a little bit about how, if we've got people who are building these sort of like decentralized business models, how they would even go about like validating the human behavior behind it?
No, Zach, your point is a great one, because we can leverage and we should leverage and use all the tools that we use for user validation today, because you're right, it's a technical element of how do we build it, but then how do people use it and what's that experience like? But I think we now have to think about that from 3 to 4 different dimensions. It has to be the user, it has to be the miners and the people that are helping run the network, and it has to be the people that are building the tools. And for all of these different groups, we have to make sure, one, their ability to plug in their asset or the value they're bringing to the table is easy, and that the value they're getting paid to do that and the behavior that's driving is appropriate. So I'm not sure. I'm sure there will be new ways of doing that will be invented. But first and foremost, I think people have to be willing to go out and engage with those groups, talk to them, ask them questions, get feedback on the proposed designs and solutions, and start to integrate that in. And also figure out how to have the collaborative invention take place. And one of the great ways is to include them in the hackathons and almost try to have people that are representing the different user groups be a part of it from a start. I by no means do I have all the answers, or I don't think they exist. I think some of the byproducts of the hackathons could be new ways of doing validation, which could be a great sort of outcome and sort of success metric for people even as they're going through the process.
I love that. I mean, and something that we found, especially whenever you're designing the solutions, is the more that you bring in the people who are actually using those solutions, the more ownership they feel over those solutions, and the more likely they are to adopt them, even as representatives. So that totally makes sense, and I love the idea of seeking out SMEs and advisors, not just from like a perspective of like, advise me about this space that I don't know much about, but actually like getting them to participate in the design seems to be like a really powerful way to sort of I guess de-risk sort of the protocol development that you're doing.
Yeah, and just to add to that quickly, I mean, I always tend to think about this as sort of a simple statement of, hey, if I build this, would you buy it? Or if I build this, would you be interested in it? And I think now there's the opportunity to have that statement and to say, hey, if we created this ecosystem, Zach, as a miner, would you be interested in mining on it for this reward? And going to somebody to say, hey, if I could pay you X, would you make your protocol available for, sort of validating transactions or allowing a smart contract to be executed? And so I think people just have to start to think more purposely about the stakeholders and what would be meaningful in terms of them getting out of it and what is reasonable for them to have as a cost to participate.
That totally makes sense. Do you have, you're a teacher, so I'm assuming you have resources that you'd recommend for checking out?
No, I do. We've got sort of both of what we're doing at CU and then sort of what I do during the day. We've got some great sort of frameworks and tools that we're happy to share, and we'll attach. We can attach to the video for everybody.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely be sure to include those links. Cannot wait to actually see them because I'm just learning a lot just via these discussions. That's fantastic. Do you have any examples like how we might want to use this the tools that you've introduced?
Well, like I said, I think in terms of fitting into some of the conversations we've had and approaches, that generally I would think groups won't be able to tackle all of them in one sort of hackathon, is to start to think of which of the areas haven't been done by other players or might be sort of the hardest elements and focus on them, and then start to break those down. As we were talking, use some of the existing and proven processes for user experience and product design, but very focused on one of the stakeholder groups.
That makes sense. Do you have any just last tips for us about getting started with the materials you're going to send over? Like, I mean, I'm thinking back to like business model canvas, traditional business model canvas. It seems pretty self-explanatory. Is that the case for this one? Are there other tips we should keep in mind as we're embarking on this journey?
No, actually, most of what we do takes the form of a canvas or a one-page template. Really believe that, it's better off getting your idea down into a one-pager so you can share it and get and be able to ball it up and start again and do another, iteration on it. So what you'll see are a lot of one-page templates that hopefully are helpful and help you refine and take forward your ideas.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, that does it. I think we've covered everything that I was hoping to. Hunter, thank you so much again for sitting down with us to chat. This has been, as always, I've learned a ton and I'm really excited to go through the resources. Thanks everyone for watching. If you want to be notified when we publish new content, our next distributed hackathon, go to buildandship.it and sign up to be notified then. We're going to have a whole bunch of links at the bottom of the description of this video. You can find this work that Hunter was talking about and hopefully ways that you can follow Hunter's work. And so you can kind of stay informed about that, and then you can follow us as well. Thanks everyone and have a great day.
Very good. Thanks, guys.